With the release of Overdress in Japan, it's now officially dawning upon us the end of the V-Series and the start of the Overdress era. But before we, the English side, will go over to the new era, I wanted to do some videos where we highlight and talk about the latest era of Vanguard, the V-Series, and discuss about certain things and elements that were introduced and finished up or touched upon within this particular era. And the best way to do that is, of course, with a tier list itself. Stand up, Vanguard! So to celebrate the coming of the new era with Overdress and to round up the V-Series, I thought it would be a great time to take this week and to highlight certain aspects of the V era as well as the last year of the V era and talk about certain things. And one of those things are of course the introduction of the order cards, which has been shown to be a very integral part of the upcoming Overdress era. So the best way to see what order cards could be is to analyze the start of this mechanic itself, which has its origins in the V-Series. So with that said, let's go over all the order cards that were released last year and order them as of course in the tier list itself. Now as you can see here, we're only going to talk about the main orders themselves, not the one from the collab set of the Bang Dream set, because if we're going to talk about all those music orders, we would be here till tomorrow. So with that said, let's begin with probably the most important order of them all, or the most used order, which is of course the shield ticket itself. This shield ticket is interesting because it is very minimalistic in what it does, but it's the only Blitz order that we got during the V-Series, which luckily is changing with Overdress. There are some really interesting things about this order card, because the fact that you don't guard with it means that it can circumvent certain guard restrictions, which is really nice. But the fact that we get this free card when we ride our Vanguard, if we go second, it's another way to increase the consistency of certain cards like the Great Free Searchers. This card made the Great Free Searchers way better, as it could be seen as a plus instead of a cycle on the search effect itself. So for it being the only Blitz order, and this actually has been seen solid play, I think it's a solid A tier order card. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a very good, it's great that we get a Blitz order, but in terms of Blitz orders, it's pretty weak. The main bonus about this thing is that we get it for free, and it allows us to generate potential pluses in the early game. And funny enough, it could counter a mechanic with the whole Gastille thing, but that is not good enough to make it a very strong card. Now with the shield ticket, we also got the Power Rise Elixir, which was the very first normal order. And this is going to be, for me, I think a D tier or a C tier, somewhere between here, because Counter Blitz 2 for 20k power, and don't forget you discard as well. It's not great. It's definitely not good, and it's not on par with other cards that also, yes, use a lot of resources to gain power or resources, but in some cases you get so much power, so much resource that it's fine. In this case, 20k is not really that much, so because of that, I think it's going to be a D tier for me, because I don't think this card is good at all. You know what, I will give it a C tier, just because it doesn't cost a lot of resources and you maybe can get away with running a copy or one in your deck, but it could be D tier as well. Now the card that I actually was referring to with the Power Rise Elixir was the next order card, which is Ignition Tactics Book of Strong Aiming. Now this card for me is going to be a solid B tier. Now if you look at the skill itself, you might think to yourself, how can this be a good skill? You used free Counter Blitz, free Soul Blast, and a discard to gain 10k power to the front row and draw free cards. Now, yes, it's just as overcosted as the Power Rise Elixir, but at the very least, the amount of resources you get out of it from one card is quite a lot. And this actually has seen some play in certain decks that actually don't use a lot of resources, like the Blade Master deck that has 2 units in the front row that can attack for Twin Drive, thus giving your entire front row extra 10k power actually means you get a lot of value from it. And on top of that, the draw free could be useful for decks that don't have a lot of inherent draw power, and at the same time don't use a lot of resources. So this card is a bit more beneficial than the Power Rise Elixir because the payout is way more than that particular order card. So far most order cards haven't been really that impressive, but that changes when we see Clear Frame of Whirling Wesh of Curse Cleansing. This order card is definitely an A tier for me. This thing does so many things right what an order card should do. Like, The fact that it inherently allows you to combo off of your deck, it allows you to resend your units, which could be used for Nova Grappler, maybe in some cases with Mega Colony. It also unlocks a card, which is great for Link Joker, so there's actually some inherent playability with certain playstyles. And we all know about the fact that thing allows us to abuse the Messiah mechanic with that whole Grade 4 thing, Volko Goat, which made this thing very much playable, and could even be used with maybe Beast Deity with a new build to some extent, but I'm not sure how good that is. But more importantly, it's the last 3 words printed on the card, which makes this a very good order card. And in fact, when you use it, you draw a card, which actually means you replace the order card in your hand, thus not losing a resource when actually activating that thing, which in my opinion is a must-have in order cards that have weak effects. The only way that you can justify not drawing a card with an order card is that the payout of the effect itself is that good. And so far, we've not seen it on the order cards, and as we're going to see with the other order cards in this list, it's not really changing all that much. But then we get the order card for VBT09 Soul Bullet Roulette. And this is kind of awkward. Because yes, this card has the text, you draw a card printed on it, but the way that you draw a card is restricted in a very obnoxious condition with the fact that you need to have 2 of specific cards that you soul charged with this effect. The chance of this going off is so slim that you might as well not even draw the card at all. And it basically turns into a counterblast discard to soul charge your card. And that's really bad. That's basically on par of the Powerizer Elixir. And maybe even more so because at least the power can be synergized with. Counterblast and discard for 1 soul, it ain't that great. And even if you get the draw, it basically is counterblast 1 to soul charge 1. Which also isn't all that great. So for me, this is going to be straight to D tier because there's not even some useful applications that you could use it for, like we see with Powerizer Elixir, that we can at least maybe abuse the extra power that we generate onto the field. Like, I am not a fan of this card at all. Now, the order card that came afterwards is once again a soul-related order card, as we've got Halo of Wands, Solar Bangle, and this one is kind of interesting because it allows us to put a specific card into the soul, which could be synergized with something like Pale Moon, Dark Irregulars, or whatever other clan that utilizes soul. But then on top of that, we can check the top 3 and put any card into our hand. Now, this is still a neg 1 because we discard a card and we put a card from our hand into the soul, and then we check top 3 to get a card into our hand. But at the very least, this is a searcher, which can be used as a combo extender because we can keep digging even further through our deck, and the fact that we put something in the soul actually can also extend our combos or our plays even further. So there's actually some playability to this card depending on what specific deck you play. Now, definitely not the go-to card for every build because it's still next to a card and maybe you don't like that, but at the very least it doesn't cause a counterblast, it doesn't cause a soul blast. In fact, it does build up soul, which could be interesting. So for me, this is going to be a high C tier. Like, yes, the value isn't all that great, but there's actually some potential within this card depending on what builds you play. And the fact that it's a grade 1 means you can use this to dig for your right pieces if you miss a grade 2 or a grade 3, which is also pretty nice. Because if you need the G assist, you also go -1. This card could prevent you from G-assisting while also building up soul. So there's actually some use cases for this card. Now, next we've got the order card from VBT11, which is Illusory Spirit Manuscript Encyclopedia. And this was an order card that I personally saw as a support for Big Belly, but could also be used in other decks because of the whole retire your units and gains 5k power and you draw a card at the end. But overall, this is for me, again, a very bad card because a counterblast soul blast to gain 5k power and a discard at the end, it ain't that great. It's probably in the low D tier as well because yes, it has the draw effect on the card, but you need to retire your own units. So what it actually is counterblast 1, soul blast 1, discard a card and sacrifice a unit to give the unit 5k power and to draw a card. That's not good in any circumstance. Maybe if the card already destroys itself, or there's some inherent synergy that it can put itself into the soul or whatever, that you can abuse it some bit, but in most cases this is really bad. The fact that you can abuse it to some extent makes it a bit better than the soul roulette thing, but it ain't that great. Now, luckily, from the main sets, we finish up with a pretty good order card, which is the one for VBT12, which is Aspiration of Limitless Power. And this card had the ability that allows you to put a card on the bottom of your deck and need to be a normal unit, and if you put a grade 3 or higher, you could draw a card. Now, because it allows you to draw a card, it fulfills a condition that it's an order card that could draw a card after using an effect, thus negating the discard for activating the ability. And putting a card on the bottom of your deck might not seem all that great, and for a lot of builds that isn't the case. And the fact that you need to put a grade 3 or higher is even that more annoying for certain builds, but it actually has some use case application for certain builds. Any deck that relies on superior routing a grade 3 or grade 4 from the deck, like Luard, Lambros, Gear Chronicle, could use this effect. But it could also benefit the whole Gridora deck that relies on superior calling grade 3s to the field from the deck to multi-tech and do all your shenanigan plays. This is a card that enables that build to be more consistent and at the same time drawing you cards, which is also really great. So there are actually some use cases for the card. But sadly, those use cases are very slim, and in some cases those clans that could use this effect already have something in place that are actually better, and it's on a body, which means it's even that much better in the first place. So for me, this is going to be a B tier order card because yes, it has all the check marks for being a solid order card, but sadly it isn't all that great. Now, if all the order cards from the V series were on the checklist of having to draw effect on the card that actually allows you to negate the minus, then this card will probably go down to a C tier because the decks actually don't utilize it at all that much. But because of all the order cards below it, which are already in C and D tier as we are right now, this card is actually a bit better because the power level of all the order cards in V series are kind of bad, so that makes this card looks a lot better than it actually is. But now we get to an actual really interesting order card, because now we have Lyrical Veil, and just look at the skill itself. It's quite a mouthful and does a lot of things, but basically what it does is for Soul Blast 2 and 2 discard, you could resurrect 2 riggers onto the field, which negates the 2 discard, and then you can give any unit onto the field intercept. That gives you a lot of shield. If you have triggers or grade 1s on the field, that's a lot of shield power you suddenly gain access to. But more importantly, this is a specific combo card for an archetype that utilizes this card to also disrupt your opponent's field while also generating a lot of value on your board. And this card, in my opinion, is the start of the whole thing with order cards now in Overdress, because this is an order card that is an integral key piece component to a mechanic and an archetype for the deck itself, which we see in Overdress right now, where order cards are actually important aspects of certain playstyles or certain decks. And for me, this is actually this is at least A tier, but I honestly wouldn't be that crazy to say S tier in comparison to what we've seen so far as the value within this card, because this order card also can be utilized in decks outside of the deck it was constructed for, with the whole fact that it gives intercept to everybody who's in the field, so it gives you shield value, and it gives any clan the ability to resurrect cards from the drop zone to the field. So if you don't really use a lot of soul, you can search for these cards, or you can draw into your deck at a consistent rate, you might be able to get away with playing this card. And being a grade 2 means that you can potentially have your grade 2 surges on it, or just the fact that you can use it in the early game if you can just Soul Blast or discard a lot of cards in the early game, that you can be a bit more aggressive as well. For me, I think this is an S tier order card in the scope of what we've seen in the V series with all the other order cards, with the fact that this definitely rose the power level of all the other order cards themselves. And yes, this card doesn't have the draw effect printed on it, but it has a very powerful effect which justifies the potential discard. And yes, we resurrect cards from the drop zone to the field, which somewhat supplements for the discard or the draw effect itself. Now, speaking of an S tier order card, we get to the final main order card that is for every nation, because then we have, of course, the Royal Palin Clan Order, and that is Tempest Sphere. And I probably don't have to explain, but this is definitely an S tier. I think it's probably the best order card, but if you don't play premium, then it's kind of weird to say. But what this card enables is actually pretty crazy. Like the fact that you can use G-Zone abilities or G-Generation Break abilities in the early game changes a lot, and it changes the dynamic of the format quite a lot in the process, and it also enables potentially GB free skills a lot faster, and potential G guards can be used much faster as well, which is pretty interesting. But on top of that, this card could actually plus you while activating it, because it can get you 2 vanilla cards, which could be triggers, which is also high shield value, meaning you can increase your defensive value. But more importantly, if you run vanilla heals, you can use this card to get your heals, which are your G Guardians, thus setting up for your later plays when you are able to stride and use your G Guardians, thus increasing your defensive capabilities very effectively right at the get-go, when you can use this card maybe on turn 1, turn 2, or at the very least before you go to your great free turns. So Tempest Sphere is a game changer and probably the most impactful order card we've seen from the V-Series. And who knows, might be that for a while until we see some crazy card from Overdress. But probably with the fact that with the focus being so heavily on order cards, I think it is just a case of time when this thing will be replaced, or at least knocked off its pedestal as one of the best order cards we've seen so far. Now, finally, we've got the order card for Royal Palin, which is of course the one for Majesty Lord Blaster. And for me, this is going to be, it's going to be either a B tier or an A tier. It's a solid card. Like, it allows you to either search your Blaster Dark or search your Blaster Blade or potentially your Majesty Lord Blaster. And seen as a grade 2, it could potentially fix your right chain if you need to go up to grade 3 but you don't have the grade 3 in your hand. This card allows you to fetch it. And it's also searchable with the other Trumpeter card, I believe, which means you have some synergy with this order card, and it just allows you to increase the consistency of the deck overall, which is great of these order cards to have. Like, it's just a pure consistency card, and it negates the minus of discarding it because you fetch a specific card. And because you fetch it from your deck and not searching for top X means you know what you're going to get out of this card. The only issue that I have with this card is in order to use this card, you need to have either a Blaster Blade or a Blaster Darks. Meaning if you don't have them, this card does absolutely nothing. So there are some restrictions to it in the process. But it doesn't cost a Counter Blast, it doesn't cost a Soul Blast, it's completely free, which is great. And that basically sums up the tier list for the order cards that we've seen from the V-Series themselves. Now again, this is all in the scope of the general power level that the order cards themselves had in the V-Series. Because if we're going to rank them as just general cards and general power of the orders themselves in the overall scope, then I would say the tier list would maybe look like this. And yeah, that is quite a big difference, because most of everything just went down to D tier. That's because most of these order cards are way overcosted and are just not justifying the fact from what you're putting into it and what you're going to get out of it. Now you also see difference that the A tier and S tier also went down a bit, because yes, the cleansing tag was a useful card for Link Joker, and the power Dragon Elixir can be used for certain decks, but overall their payout isn't all that great, and they are very limited in use cases. Now, the Royal Palin card is very specific, but it gets the job done in every single circumstances. Because the other two cards, the Dragon Elixir and the Cleansing Tag, they draw you a card, but they only draw you a card if you can activate a certain scenario. If you cannot activate that, they don't draw you a card, meaning it's kind of a dead card in certain situations. The other card, the Royal Palin one, it's very much likely that you will have a Blaster Dark or a Blaster Blade, because that's probably the only grade 2s that you have access to. And the moment that you go into the late game, you don't necessarily need to activate it anymore. It's more importantly in the early game, and you're going to ride up to a grade 2. And that's either a Blaster Dark or a Blaster Blade, meaning you have access to the other one at almost every single instance. But this is basically my thought about how I see these order cards. Now, definitely with Overdress, things are going to change significantly. We see order cards with more impactful skills, with more dynamic skills, and also order cards that are used as an integral part to their mechanic. And more bluntly, we see a whole mechanic keyword itself that synergizes and works off of order cards, which is the whole Alchemagic mechanic. So I'm very curious what the future will hold for order cards themselves, and yeah, I cannot wait for the crazy things we might see in Overdress in the coming years. But that's about everything for today. I'll leave a link in the description down below to this tier list if you want to do it yourself. And of course, you can tweet them at me at Mr. Timeleap to share your opinion about the tier list and tell me how wrong I am with my opinions. But With that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over patreon.com/RankedInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can go to patreon.com/RankedInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!